The battering ram struck the front door with a thunderous crack that shattered the evening's peace. 8-year-old Sarah Goldberg dropped her chocolate gelt, the coins scattering across the hardwood floor as armed figures in tactical gear flooded through the splintered doorway. The menorah's gentle flames flickered wildly in the sudden chaos, casting frantic shadows across terrified faces. Everyone on the ground, hands where we can see them. The commanding voice cut through the screams of children and the crash of overturning furniture. Grandma Rose, 83 years old, and still wearing her apron from making latkes, clutched her chest as officers surrounded the dining table where moments before, 3 generations had been singing traditional Hanukkah songs. Just 30 minutes earlier, the Goldberg home had been filled with the warm aromas of potato pancakes and the joyful laughter of family tradition. David Goldberg had been lighting the fourth night's candles, while his wife Rebecca gathered the children around their antique silver menorah, a treasured heirloom that had survived the Holocaust. The dining room glowed with golden light, reflecting off the carefully polished silver and the excited faces of 6 children ranging from 5 to 12 years old. "Tonight we remember the miracle of the oil," David had been saying, his voice gentle and reverent. "How sometimes the smallest flame can bring the greatest light to darkness." Rebecca smiled, watching their youngest daughter attempt to unwrap a dreidel with chubby fingers. The extended family had gathered as they did every year, cousins and aunts filling every chair around the expanded dining table. Steam rose from platters of brisket and kugel, while the children's artwork depicting the Hanukkah story decorated the walls in proud display. Outside, December's chill had settled over Maple Street, but inside the Goldberg house, warmth radiated from every corner. This was the 4th night of Hanukkah, traditionally a time for gratitude and reflection. Rebecca had spent days preparing, ensuring every detail would create perfect memories for their children and grandchildren. But across the street, Karen Mitchell sat at her kitchen window, her fingers drumming impatiently against the sill. Her pale eyes tracked every car that pulled into the Goldberg driveway, every guest who walked up the front steps, carrying gifts and covered dishes. The parking situation had become unbearable, she told herself. Absolutely unbearable. 3 weeks ago, Karen had confronted David about the monthly community dinners the family hosted. "Your guests are taking up all the street parking," she had complained, standing on his front porch with arms crossed tightly across her chest. "I can't even park in front of my own house anymore." David had been polite but firm. "It's a public street, Mrs. Mitchell. Our friends and family have every right to park there. Perhaps if you speak with the city council about resident parking permits." The suggestion had infuriated Karen beyond reason. She wasn't about to jump through bureaucratic hoops because these people couldn't control their gatherings. Night after night, she watched the comings and goings, her resentment festering like an infected wound. Tonight had been the final straw. By 6 o'clock, every available parking space within 2 blocks had been occupied by Goldberg guests. Karen had been forced to park 3 streets over and walk through the cold, her groceries growing heavier with each step. Standing at her window now, watching the warm light spill from the Goldberg house while her own home remained dark and empty, Karen reached for her phone. Her thumb hovered over the numbers. She had tried calling the non-emergency line about noise complaints before, but nothing had changed. Maybe it was time for more dramatic measures. The idea formed slowly, wickedly, all those children coming and going at odd hours. All those adults gathering in what appeared to be some kind of organized meetings. Who really knew what went on behind those closed doors? At 7:23 p.m., Karen Mitchell dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? I need to report suspected child trafficking at 247 Maple Street, Karen said, her voice carefully measured to sound concerned rather than vindictive. There are always different children going in and out of that house. Tonight, there must be at least 8 or 10 kids in there with multiple adults. I've been watching for weeks, and I'm really worried about what's happening to those children. The dispatcher's tone immediately shifted to high alert. Ma'am, can you describe what you're seeing that makes you suspect trafficking? Karen had prepared for this question. The children look scared when they arrive. Different children come at different times, always with different adults. And there's what looks like some kind of ceremony happening right now. Lots of chanting and candles. The children are being made to participate in something. I'm really concerned for their safety. Within minutes, the call had been escalated through the chain of command. Child trafficking allegations triggered immediate response protocols. The SWAT team received orders to prepare for a high-priority raid on a suspected trafficking operation involving multiple children in immediate danger. Back inside the Goldberg home, 9-year-old Joshua was spinning his dreidel when the lights went out. The power had been cut as tactical teams surrounded the house. Emergency floodlights suddenly blazed through every window, turning the cozy dining room into a harsh, terrifying spotlight. What's happening? Daddy! Sarah whimpered, clinging to David's leg as the sound of heavy boots thundered across the front porch. Then came the battering ram. The first officer through the door swept his rifle across the room, taking in the scene of terrified families huddled around a dining table. Children were crying, adults were shouting, and an elderly woman appeared to be having some kind of medical emergency. Where are the victims? The team leader shouted over the chaos. We have reports of children being held against their will. David raised his hands slowly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Officer, there's been a terrible mistake. This is my family's Hanukkah celebration. These are our children, our relatives. Please, my mother-in-law is having chest pains. But protocols demanded that all children be separated from adults until the situation could be assessed. 6 children were quickly ushered into the living room, while their parents remained in the dining room under guard. The sound of their crying echoed through the house as they called for their mothers and fathers. Grandma Rose collapsed in her chair, clutching her chest as her breathing became labored. My heart, she gasped. Please, I need my medication. It's in my purse in the kitchen. An officer retrieved her medication, while another called for emergency medical services. The elderly woman's face had turned alarmingly pale, her lips taking on a bluish tint. Rebecca knelt beside her mother, tears streaming down her face as she held the woman's trembling hand. Please let me comfort my children, she begged. They're terrified. This is all a misunderstanding. We're just celebrating Hanukkah. In the confusion, one officer's boot knocked over the silver menorah. It crashed to the floor with a sound like breaking hearts, the ancient metalwork denting against the hardwood. Oil from the memorial candles spread across the floor while wax splattered the family photographs that lined the mantelpiece. The children's artwork was torn from the walls as officers searched for evidence of criminal activity. Closets were ransacked, drawers dumped, and the carefully prepared feast lay ruined as the dining table was cleared for evidence collection. When paramedics arrived for Grandma Rose, they found her blood pressure dangerously elevated and her heart rhythm irregular. She was conscious but disoriented, asking repeatedly for her granddaughter Sarah. The decision was made to transport her immediately to Mercy General Hospital. I want to go with her, Rebecca cried as they loaded her mother onto a stretcher. She's 83 years old and she's terrified. "Ma'am, we need you to remain here until we can sort this situation out." The commanding officer replied, "Children's Services is on the way to interview the minors." For the next 3 hours, the Goldberg family endured interrogations, searches, and the heartbreaking process of watching their children questioned by social workers. Each child was asked if they had been hurt, if they were afraid of the adults in the house, if anyone had touched them inappropriately. Joshua, the middle child, tried to explain through his tears. "We were just doing Hanukkah. We sing songs and eat potato pancakes and Grandma tells stories. Nobody hurt us. Why won't you let me see my mom?" Gradually, as statements were taken and the true nature of the gathering became clear, the officers began to realize they had walked into a family celebration, not a criminal operation. The ceremony was a religious observance. The different children were cousins and friends of the family. The scared expressions Karen had reported were simply the normal shy behavior of children arriving at a large gathering. By 11 p.m., all charges were dropped and the family was cleared. But the damage had been done. The house was destroyed, heirlooms were broken, and Grandma Rose remained in the cardiac unit under observation. The children would not sleep in their own beds that night, too frightened by the invasion of their safe space. David stood in his ruined dining room, surveying the destruction. The menorah lay dented on the floor, its century-old craftsmanship now marred forever. Food was smeared across the walls, photographs were cracked, and the smell of fear and violence lingered in air that had once been filled with joy and tradition. "Who would do this to us?" Rebecca whispered, holding their youngest daughter, who had not stopped crying since the raid began. "Who would make up such horrible lies about our family?" The answer came the next morning, when Detective Maria Santos arrived at the Goldberg home to deliver her preliminary report. She sat across from David and Rebecca at their kitchen table, the only room that had escaped major damage. "We've reviewed the 911 call." Detective Santos began carefully. The caller identified herself as Karen Mitchell from 245 Maple Street. She made specific allegations about child trafficking that triggered our emergency response protocols. David's face darkened with understanding. "The parking disputes. She's been complaining about our guests parking on the public street. We're investigating whether this constitutes filing a false police report," the detective continued. "In the meantime, I want you to know that your security cameras recorded the entire evening. That footage may be very helpful in establishing a timeline and corroborating your account." The security footage told the real story. Hours of video showed families arriving with children in tow, carrying presents and covered dishes. It captured the warm greetings, the hugs, the children playing together in the front yard while their parents chatted. There was nothing sinister, nothing unusual, nothing that could remotely be construed as criminal activity. More damaging for Karen was the additional footage from the weeks leading up to Hanukkah. The cameras had captured her standing in her front yard, photographing the license plates of cars parked on Maple Street. They showed her confronting guests as they walked to their vehicles, demanding to know who they were and why they were always at the Goldberg house. Most damning of all was footage from the night of the raid itself. The cameras clearly showed Karen at her window, phone pressed to her ear, while she watched the Goldberg house. The timestamp showed she made her 911 call while looking directly at the warm, innocent scene of a family celebrating their religious tradition. News of the false accusation spread through the Maple Street neighborhood within hours. Maria Gonzalez, who lived 2 houses down, was the first to arrive at the Goldberg home with a casserole and an apology. "I am so sorry this happened to your family," she said. tears in her eyes as she surveyed the damage. "If there's anything at all we can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask." The Petersons from across the street arrived with cleaning supplies and offered to help repair the damage. The Johnsons brought dinner for the children. One by one, neighbors who had always exchanged pleasant greetings with the Goldbergs came to express their horror at what had happened. "We all knew this was about parking," said Tom Peterson, shaking his head in disgust. "Karen has complained to half the neighborhood about your family gatherings, but to call in a trafficking report, that's beyond despicable." At the hospital, Grandma Rose remained under observation for stress-induced cardiac symptoms. Her granddaughter Sarah sat beside her bed, holding her wrinkled hand while she dozed fitfully. "The bad men are gone, Grandma," Sarah whispered. "Daddy says we're safe now." But Rose's eyes held a haunted quality that hadn't been there before. She had survived the Holocaust as a child, had come to America believing she had found safety for her family. The invasion of her grandson's home, the terror on her great-grandchildren's faces, had awakened old nightmares she thought she had buried decades ago. "I never thought," she said softly to David when he came to visit, "never thought I would see such hatred again. In America. In our neighborhood." The story broke in the local media within 48 hours. "Hanukkah celebration mistaken for trafficking operation," read the headline in the Riverdale Gazette. The article detailed the false accusation, the destructive raid, and the hospitalization of an elderly Holocaust survivor. Public outrage was swift and fierce. The newspaper's comment section filled with hundreds of responses condemning Karen's actions. Social media exploded with sympathy for the Goldberg family and calls for justice. The story was picked up by regional news outlets, then national ones. Karen Mitchell found herself at the center of a media storm she had never anticipated. Reporters camped outside her house, neighbors glared at her when she left to buy groceries, and her employer received dozens of calls demanding her termination. When Detective Santos arrived at Karen's door with an arrest warrant for filing a false police report, Karen's defiance had crumbled into desperate justification. "They were having all these meetings," she protested as handcuffs were placed around her wrists. "How was I supposed to know it was just a religious thing? All those children, all those cars." "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," Detective Santos replied coldly. "I strongly suggest you use it." The legal proceedings moved quickly. Karen was charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor that carried potential jail time and fines. But the civil lawsuits that followed were far more serious. The Goldberg family, represented by prominent civil rights attorney Jonathan Weiss, filed suit for emotional distress, property damage, and civil rights violations. Grandma Rose's medical bills alone exceeded $15,000, not including the ongoing trauma counseling the entire family would require. The city also launched an internal investigation into the police response. While the officers had followed proper procedure in responding to a reported trafficking situation, questions arose about whether additional verification might have prevented the traumatic scene. 3 weeks after the raid, the community organized a solidarity dinner at the local community center. Nearly 200 neighbors, friends, and supporters gathered to show their support for the Goldberg family. The event raised funds for the family's legal expenses and home repairs. Rabbi Sarah Goldstein of Temple Beth Shalom spoke at the gathering, her voice carrying across the packed room. "What happened to the Goldberg family is an attack on all of us who cherish religious freedom and community celebration. But look around this room tonight. See how many people have come together to say never again to hatred and false accusations. David Goldberg took the microphone with visible emotion. 3 weeks ago, our family's celebration of light in the darkness was interrupted by the darkest kind of hatred. But standing here tonight, surrounded by your love and support, I see that the light always wins in the end. The applause was thunderous, but the most moving moment came when 8-year-old Sarah Goldberg climbed onto the stage. In her small, clear voice, she recited the Hebrew blessing over the Hanukkah candles, the same blessing that had been interrupted by the raid. As the community joined in the familiar words, many wiping tears from their eyes, the message was clear. Hatred would not silence their traditions. Fear would not dim their celebrations, and false accusations would not divide their community. The civil trial began 4 months later. Karen Mitchell, now represented by a court-appointed attorney after losing her job and depleting her savings, sat quietly as the evidence mounted against her. The security footage was played in its entirety, showing the peaceful nature of the Hanukkah celebration and Karen's deliberate surveillance. The 911 call was played multiple times, each repetition highlighting the calculated nature of Karen's lies. Expert witnesses testified about the trauma experienced by children during SWAT raids, the medical impact on elderly individuals during extreme stress, and the cultural significance of the destroyed religious artifacts. Grandma Rose, now 90 days past the raid, but still suffering from anxiety and heart palpitations, testified about the terror she felt when armed men burst into her family's celebration. "I survived the Nazis as a child," she said, her voice barely audible in the packed courtroom. "I came to America for safety. I never imagined that my great-grandchildren would experience such fear in their own home." Karen's attorney attempted to argue that his client had acted in good faith, genuinely concerned about children's welfare. But the evidence was overwhelming. Text messages found on Karen's phone showed her complaining to friends about the invasion of her neighborhood by those people and their weird ceremonies. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a verdict in favor of the Goldberg family. The award included compensation for property damage, medical expenses, emotional distress, and punitive damages totaling $247,000. But the financial penalty was only part of Karen's punishment. As part of the settlement agreement, she was required to attend cultural sensitivity training, perform 200 hours of community service at local religious organizations, and deliver a public apology to the Goldberg family and the broader community. The apology took place at the same community center where the Solidarity Dinner had been held. Local television cameras captured the scene as Karen Mitchell, visibly shaken and remorseful, read from a prepared statement. "I want to apologize to the Goldberg family, to their children, and to Grandma Rose for the pain and trauma I caused through my false accusations," she began, her voice breaking. "What I did was wrong, inexcusable, and born out of ignorance and prejudice that I am deeply ashamed of." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes before continuing. "I allowed petty neighborhood disputes to poison my judgment and turn me against innocent people who were simply celebrating their faith with their families. I take full responsibility for my actions and the harm they caused." The Goldberg family sat in the front row, their faces impassive but attentive. Karen's eyes found Sarah's, the 8-year-old who had been so frightened during the raid. "To the children who were terrorized because of my lies, I am especially sorry. You deserve to feel safe and loved in your family's home. and I robbed you of that feeling. I hope that someday you can forgive me, though I know I will never forgive myself." When Karen finished speaking and left the stage, Rabbi Goldstein approached the microphone. "Forgiveness is a process," she said simply. "Today is the beginning of that process, not the end. True repentance requires not just words, but changed behavior over time." 6 months after the raid, the Goldberg family held their first Hanukkah celebration since the incident. The house had been fully repaired, security systems upgraded, and the destroyed artifacts replaced where possible. The dented menorah had been carefully restored by a Jewish artisan who specialized in Holocaust-era artifacts. This time, the celebration was even larger than before. Neighbors who had never participated in Jewish holidays joined the Goldberg family, eager to learn about traditions they had never understood. The local media covered the event, but this time as a story of healing and community unity. As David lit the first night's candle, he spoke words that had taken on new meaning over the past year. "We light these candles to remember that even in the darkest times, even when hatred seems to overwhelm us, there is always light. The light of truth, the light of community, the light of love that cannot be extinguished by ignorance or fear." Grandma Rose, now fully recovered and surrounded by her great-grandchildren, nodded with satisfaction. "The miracle of Hanukkah," she said softly, "is not just that the oil lasted 8 nights. The miracle is that the light survived it all." As the community joined hands around the expanding table, their voices rising in traditional songs, the true meaning of the holiday became clear. Hanukkah was not just about ancient miracles, but about modern ones too. The miracle of neighbors coming together across religious and cultural lines. The miracle of a community refusing to let hatred take root. The miracle of justice prevailing over false accusations. Outside, snow began to fall gently on Maple Street, covering the neighborhood in pristine white. Inside the Goldberg home, the menorah cast its warm glow over faces filled with joy, resilience, and the unshakable belief that light will always triumph over darkness. The children played dreidel as they had a year ago, their laughter echoing through rooms that had once been filled with terror. But now, they played with a deeper understanding of what it meant to be safe, what it meant to be protected by community, and what it meant to see justice served. As the evening wound down and guests prepared to leave, David stood at his front window, looking out at the neighborhood that had rallied around his family in their darkest hour. Cars filled the street once again, just as they had on that terrible night nearly a year ago. But now, he saw them differently. Each car represented not an inconvenience or an intrusion, but a family that had chosen to stand with them. Each parking space taken was a declaration that love was stronger than hate, that community was stronger than division, and that the light of understanding could illuminate even the darkest corners of human prejudice. The Hanukkah celebration of 2023 would be remembered not as the night a family's tradition was shattered, but as the beginning of a community's transformation. From the ashes of one woman's hatred had grown a neighborhood united in its commitment to protect and celebrate the diversity that made them stronger. And every year thereafter, when the Goldberg family lit their restored menorah, they would remember not just the ancient miracle of oil that burned for 8 nights, but the modern miracle of a community that refused to let the light go out.